Welcome to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
Today we are plunging into, well, an absolute phenomenon, wasn't it? The hit Netflix K-drama, The Glory.
Oh, yeah, it was huge.
So if you were gripped by its really intense story, or maybe you just heard all the buzz and wondered what was going on.
You're definitely in the right place.
Because we are doing a deep dive using all the sources you shared about this incredibly powerful series.
That's right. We've got like a whole stack of material, articles, reviews, some really detailed analysis, and even interviews with the writer and the cast.
So our mission today is basically to unpack everything. Where the story came from, the, intricate web of characters.
Yeah, the really heavy themes it tackles and its massive real-world impact. Its global reach was just incredible.
This isn't just going to be a plot summary, folks. We're exploring a show that tackles something truly horrific: school violence. And it does it through the lens of a victim's meticulously planned, almost, 2-decade-long quest for revenge.
Nearly 20 years. It's staggering.
It hit hard, it definitely sparked conversations, and we're going to try and understand why it resonated so deeply with people all over the world.
Okay, let's dive in.
So where does a story this dark, this compelling even start? The sources you shared point to an origin that's kind of surprisingly intimate. It comes directly from the writer Kim Yoon-suk.
It's a really fascinating starting point, actually. Kim Yoon-suk, who's known for a lot of hit romantic dramas, right? Completely different vibe, usually.
Totally.
She found the core idea, the spark, in a question her own daughter asked her.
Get this question. Her daughter asked, "Mom, would you be more heartbroken if I beat someone nearly to death, or if I got beat nearly to death by someone else?"
Wow. Just imagine that.
Right. And Kim Yoon-suk herself said that question became the sort of ethical and emotional cornerstone for the whole narrative of The Glory.
It immediately puts you right into that dilemma, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The duality of suffering, inflicting pain versus enduring it, and maybe, which is harder for a parent to even think about.
That is incredibly heavy, and it completely reframes the story from the very beginning. It's not just about a victim, it's about this profound, almost existential level of pain tied to violence like that.
Exactly. And it makes total sense that she saw this drama as a real departure for her. She mentioned that The Glory is different from her usual stuff, and she actually took that as a compliment.
Yeah, she said she saw the show embracing either entertainment or significance. She wasn't just aiming for escapism here.
No, clearly aiming for significance. Or maybe trying to balance both, which is quite a feat with this subject matter.
And she even pointed to her language reflecting that shift. She talked about using uncommon words in ordinary drama.
Right, like that line, "From now on, every single day will be ominous." She felt that was uniquely her style, even as she was going into this much darker territory.
It shows real intention, doesn't it? This wasn't just another script. It felt like it came from a really deep, personal place, grappling with the nature of harm.
Absolutely. And the harm in this story, well, it's devastatingly real. The sources detail Moon Dong-eun's high school experience, describing it as just this horrific ordeal. Relentless school violence, bullying.
And it wasn't just, kids being mean. It was systematic torture, leaving physical scars, obviously, but also profound psychological and material damage.
The descriptions are stark. The physical abuse, like being burned with a curling iron, which is apparently based on a real incident.
Horrifying.
It's just one part. The psychological torment, that feeling of being completely powerless, completely alone, that's depicted as maybe even more damaging in the long run.
And crucially, the sources really hammer home the absolute lack of any adequate punishment for the perpetrators.
None. They were protected, often because they came from money, from privilege. It created this sense that they were untouchable, which just made Dong-eun's suffering even worse.
And this failure wasn't just the system, it was the adults, too. The ones who should have protected her. That detail about the teacher.
Oh, that's infuriating.
The teacher who not only did nothing, but actually beat Dong-eun for refusing to lie on the school forms about the bullying when she was forced to drop out.
That level of adult complicity, that betrayal,
Yeah.
it's just a core part of her trauma. It wasn't just her peers. It was the institutions, the people meant to be in charge.
And that deep sense of betrayal, that unresolved injustice, it fuels this incredibly deep-seated resentment. One source brings in the Japanese concept of Han.
Yeah, Han. It's described as this complex mix of sorrow, anger, resentment, often suppressed, stemming from perceived injustice or oppression.
A feeling that doesn't just fade, right?
Exactly. It can fester for a lifetime, apparently, even after the people who caused it are gone. That concept really helps explain the sheer intensity and longevity of Dong-eun's pain and, well, her drive afterwards.
Han as a driving force. That makes so much sense for what happens next, because after hitting rock bottom, just sinking into despair, she makes this pivotal decision.
Her life gets a new focus, a singular mission: revenge.
And the sources are clear this wasn't like a snap decision made in anger.
Not at all.
Yeah.
It was a plan conceived way back in the depths of her trauma and then cultivated meticulously for almost 2 decades.
20 years. Just think about that. 20 years focused on one goal. It says so much about the depth of her pain and the absolute conviction she had.
That level of patience, that focus.
Yeah.
It's almost terrifyingly impressive, isn't it?
It really is. And her approach is described very specifically in the sources as strategic, mirroring her playing style in Baduk, or Go.
Right, Baduk. For anyone not familiar, it's a board game, very strategic, about territory and influence. Early moves might seem small, insignificant even.
But they're all part of a bigger, long-term plan to encircle and eventually defeat your opponent.
Exactly. And that's Dong-eun. Her moves in life, just like her moves on the Baduk board, they're calculated. She doesn't rush. She makes these seemingly normal steps first.
Laying the groundwork.
Precisely. But every single one is executed with this intense focus, building towards her ultimate goal, the complete unraveling of her tormentors.
And her main target, the absolute ringleader, is Park Hyun-jin. The sources mention Dong-eun figuring out Hyun-jin's biggest vulnerability: her daughter, Ye-sol.
Yeah, the plan involves getting right into Hyunjin's life by becoming Yi-sol's homeroom teacher.
Yeah.
She even gets her national teacher certification specifically for this.
Now, that part of the plan, targeting the daughter, even indirectly, that apparently caused some discussion among viewers initially. One source pointed that out.
You can see why. It feels morally murky, doesn't it? Targeting an innocent child.
Absolutely. It complicates Dong-eun straight away. She's not just a pure victim anymore. But the source also clarifies something important. Dong-eun's primary targets are always the bullies themselves.
Okay.
Ye-sol is definitely affected, you can't deny that, but her suffering is framed more as, like, collateral damage, a consequence of her parents' actions and the whole world Dong-eun brings crashing down around them.
That's a crucial distinction, I think. It lets the story focus on the bullies getting what they deserve, while still acknowledging that revenge like this is messy. It has consequences beyond the intended targets.
It forces you, as the audience, to grapple with those gray areas. Dong-eun is seeking justice, yes, but her methods aren't clean. They have a moral cost, and the show doesn't really shy away from that.
Yeah, it lays it all out there.
So you've got this deep trauma, the system failing her, this festering Han, and then this 20-year Baduk-style plan culminating in this really targeted approach. It's a powerful, incredibly dark foundation for everything that follows.
Definitely sets the stage.
All right, so let's meet the players in this intense drama. At the absolute core, obviously, is Moon Dong-eun, the protagonist who goes on this harrowing journey from victim to the, well, meticulous architect of her own revenge.
The transformation is just, it's the heart of the show, isn't it?
Yeah.
The sources really dig into her psychological journey, her resilience. It's incredible. Despite everything she went through, she refuses to be permanently broken.
She channels it all.
Exactly. She channels that pain into this razor-sharp focus on her goal. And her strategic mind isn't just about the planning, it's how she executes it too.
And what's fascinating, like the sources point out, is that she doesn't really get her hands dirty in the, traditional sense. She's not out there physically attacking them back.
No, not directly. Instead, she sets traps, she reveals secrets, she manipulates the existing toxic dynamics within that group of bullies. She basically incites them to turn on each other.
So they kind of destroy themselves?
Pretty much. It's a very cerebral, psychological kind of revenge. Requires huge control and patience.
And a huge part of why this character landed so powerfully is the performance, right? The sources rave about Song Hye-kyo.
Oh, completely. Phenomenal is the word used. They specifically mention her ability to convey Dong-eun's whole inner world through these tiny changes in expression. A trembling lip, the look in her eyes.
You see the weight of it all.
You really do. Years of suffering, but also this unwavering steel, this resolve. It's all there. You can't take your eyes off her. It's captivating.
She absolutely anchors the whole thing. Now, standing opposite her are the perpetrators, the group responsible for that initial devastating harm. Park Hyun-jin, Jinon Jae-jeon, Choi Hae-jong, Sun Myung-oh, and Lee Sara.
Yeah. The sources detail their individual personalities, but also the just toxic ecosystem they create together.
Right.
They're driven by this potent mix of entitlement, privilege, they mostly come from money, and just a chilling lack of empathy or remorse. any remorse at all.
And the dynamics within the group are awful, too. They bully each other, exploit each other.
But they're ultimately bound together by their shared secret, their shared cruelty. It's a horrible kind of bond.
And Dong-eun's plan just systematically targets those bonds, targets their individual weaknesses, leading to their, well, inevitable unraveling.
Yeah, and audience reactions cited in the sources really focus on how truly detestable these characters are. People apparently appreciated that the show, being on Netflix, didn't censor how evil they could be.
Makes their downfall more satisfying for viewers, I guess.
Definitely seems that way. There's a little interesting tidbit from one source, Kim Gun-woo, the actor who played Sun Myung-oh.
Yeah.
He said the wedding scene was the most memorable for him because, maybe surprisingly, the main cast wasn't actually that close personally when they filmed it.
Huh. That's interesting. A little peek behind the curtain. Shows how much is performance, building those intense on-screen dynamics.
Right. But Dong-eun's journey isn't completely solo. She finds these crucial, though sometimes complicated, allies.
First up, there's Jo Yo-jung, the doctor who seems like this pure soul at first.
Their initial connection is through Baduk lessons, right? There's that symbolism again.
Yep. It's like this calm little island in the middle of her storm of revenge plans. But there's that turning point, the source's note, where she abruptly ends the lessons, tells him he isn't her true opponent.
Oof. That's harsh.
It is, but it shows that even though she might like him, her focus is still absolutely singular. Their relationship, initially at least, fits into her larger strategy.
But Yo-jung has his own darkness going on too, doesn't he? He does. The sources reveal he has his own personal quest for revenge against the man who killed his father, who's already in prison.
So this shared desire for revenge, even for different reasons, different targets, that's what eventually pulls him fully into her plan.
Seems like it. He becomes a key ally, using his medical skills, his resources to help her out. He becomes her executioner, as they put it.
Although one source did offer a bit of critique there, saying that Yeo-jung's own revenge plot sometimes feels a bit weaker. Or less connected to the main story for some viewers.
Yeah, I could see that. It's a valid point. His story definitely serves to support Dong-eun and parallel her journey, but maybe his own arc doesn't feel quite as fleshed out or resolved.
Fair enough. Okay, the other really vital ally is Kang Hyun-nam, the domestic violence victim who Dong-eun basically recruits.
Their bond is described as one of mutual aid, which feels very fitting. Hyun-nam helps Dong-eun gather intel, run errands, do the legwork.
And she's motivated by her own suffering, obviously, and this desperate hope for a better life for her daughter, Lee Seona.
Exactly. And in return, Dong-eun offers protection, support, helps plan Hyun-nam's escape from her abusive husband.
This relationship is such a powerful contrast to some of the other really difficult parent-child dynamics in the show, like Dong-eun's with her own mother.
Oh, completely. It's a partnership built on shared hardship, but also this sort of pragmatic exchange. The sources emphasize how Dong-eun protecting Seona is almost like a reward for Hyun-nam's loyalty and support.
But it also feels like it reflects Dong-eun's own deep wish to protect the youth and innocence that was stolen from her.
Yeah, like a little flicker of light, of something positive within her otherwise incredibly dark purpose. It's one of the more hopeful elements.
Beyond these core figures, there are other characters crucial to the plot's complexity. Hyun-jin's husband initially seems kind of detached, right? Even called a pure soul by one character.
Yeah, but the sources quickly tear down that pure image. He's complex. He's described as willing to stain himself, especially when his daughter, Ye-sol, gets pulled into the mess.
He definitely embodies this kind of ambiguous morality, navigating the world of the super rich. The sources mention moments that highlight this, like how he treats his driver or that expensive handbag he gives Hae-jung almost dismissively.
And there's a fascinating interpretation from a psychologist quoted in one source, suggesting that Do-young's actions, maybe even feeling like killing Jeon Jae-jeon, was necessary and feeling no guilt.
Oh.
Yeah, stemmed from this deep-seated lack of trust. He doesn't trust anyone, including his own wife, Hyun-jin.
So that analysis positions him as a kind of dark mirror to Dong-eun.
Kind of. They both operate in shadows, making strategic moves. They both have these dark spirits, as the source puts it, that sort of complement each other in this weird narrative symmetry. He's not a villain like Hyun-jin, but he's definitely not purely good either.
Far from it. And then finally there's Yoon So-hee, the victim who came before Dong-eun.
Her story is critical backstory. Her suffering, her death. It fuels Dong-eun's resolve and becomes a key piece of the puzzle in Dong-eun's plan.
One source did mention that the reveal about So her pregnancy, her death maybe felt a bit abrupt to some viewers, considering how important it was.
Yeah, it adds another layer of just sheer tragedy to what the bullies did. And the detail about her mother keeping, so he's name tagged for all those years.
Using it for blackmail later.
Right. It just underscores how this trauma doesn't just affect the victim. It ripples out, impacts families, lingers for decades, just waiting to be unearthed or weaponized.
These characters, they really form this intricate human landscape that Dong-eun has to navigate for her revenge. They're not just plot points, their complexities, their relationships are totally central to the show's power.
Absolutely. It's a rich tapestry.
Okay, so as we move from the characters, let's really dig into the deeper meaning of the glory, because this show is so much more than just a revenge thriller, isn't it? It's a searing commentary on some really heavy societal issues. Revenge, obviously, is the engine driving it all.
It is, yeah. And the sources spend a lot of time exploring what kind of revenge it is. It's depicted not just as, a simple eye for an eye thing, but as this long, arduous process. It takes a huge psychological toll, even on Dong-eun.
And her perspective is key, right? She doesn't see it as just hurting them back.
No. Her goal is described more as forcing the perpetrators to finally, truly face the consequences of their horrific actions. Actions they basically evaded accountability for their whole lives.
And that resonated hugely with audiences. The sources confirm that. There was this shared feeling of, immense satisfaction watching her plan unfold.
Taps into that universal desire for justice, especially when the official systems fail, which they clearly did here.
So the show offers this really cathartic, though maybe, highly stylized and not entirely realistic.
Definitely not realistic in its success rate, probably.
Right. But it offers this take on revenge as a pathway to personal justice.
And this connects directly to how it portrays school violence. The show depicts the devastating impact with just brutal honesty. The sources note it reflects this widespread perception, particularly in South Korea, that bullying is a really serious, maybe even systemic problem.
And adding that disturbing layer of reality, elements of the series are apparently based on real-life events in South Korea.
Yeah, it's not pure fiction. It draws on documented incidents of extreme school violence, which makes it even more chilling.
Which brings us to that really complex point raised in the sources about the producer, Ahn Gil-ho.
Oh, right. His admission. He admitted to having physically assaulted someone back when he was in high school, studying abroad. Said his girlfriend was being teased. He apologized to the victims years later.
That admission, coming from someone producing a show that so strongly condemns school violence, it adds this undeniable layer of complexity, maybe even discomfort to the whole thing.
It definitely does. It makes you think about who gets to tell these stories and how their own past interact with the narratives they create. It's complicated.
Very. The show also powerfully depicts the whole issue of bystanders and complicity. That scene with young Dong-eun being beaten while the teachers just stood by.
It's burned into your memory. And one source even included a viewer's personal story that echoed that, exactly witnessing similar adult indifference. It just hammers home how common and how damaging that failure to act can be.
And the sources also analyze characters like Jeong-gran and Hyun through that lens. They were part of the group, yes, but they're also seen partly as victims of fear themselves.
Right, like they normalized operating in these abusive environments just to survive. They also show elements of unprocessed trauma, but also, opportunism. It highlights the messy reality of how people cope or fail to cope with these cruel social dynamics.
The theme of justice or retribution is constantly there. The show really critiques the legal system by showing how the perpetrators, because of their privilege, essentially escape any meaningful legal consequences.
And that legal failure is precisely what fuels Dong-eun's quest for her own personal justice.
Mm-hmm.
The show focuses heavily on retributive justice payback, basically.
It asks whether the legal and social fallout shown is entirely believable in a Korean context, acknowledging Dong-eun's level of success is probably fantasy.
Highly improbable, yeah.
But that underlying feeling remains powerful. When the system fails you so completely, victims feel they have this deep-seated right to seek their own form of justice.
And this inability of the system to hold them accountable is deeply tied to social class and power. The sources really emphasize this. The bullies come from wealthy, connected families, and that status shields them, at least for a long time.
So Dong-eun's whole struggle is in many ways a battle against this entrenched system where money and power can just override basic justice.
Absolutely. This show also explores trauma, healing, resilience, though maybe not in the ways we usually expect. The sources detail the long-term psychological effects of Dong-eun's trauma. Her journey is complex because her path forward isn't therapy, it's not traditional healing.
It's revenge. Singularly focused on revenge.
Exactly, which raises that compelling question. Can she find true healing through this? Or is revenge presented here as maybe the only way for her to reclaim her power, her agency, after being so utterly stripped of it?
The show kind of leaves that open, doesn't it? Suggesting maybe revenge is her form of moving forward, even if it completely consumes her.
It seems to. Now, a particularly insightful source focuses specifically on the mother-daughter relationships in the drama, draws a really sharp contrast between two main pairs.
Okay. First, Dong-eun and her own mother, Jong-mi, which is just awful.
Horrendous. Described as incredibly damaging, irresponsible. The mother abandons her, uses their connection as a weapon, even extorts her later.
The source mentions factors like absence of fathers, inadequate social support for women potentially contributing to this dynamic, and how Dong-eun still may be influenced by traditional ideas of filial piety or zhao.
Right, that cultural aspect.
Right. Still feels some burden for her mother, even as she has to become almost as cold-blooded herself just to break free. The mother's emotional ignorance, her contempt, it's cited as causing Dong-eun's long-term desperation.
And then, in total contrast, you have Kang Hyun and her daughter, Lee Sienna.
Their relationship is described as mutual aid and symbiotic. Their bond is forged in that shared hell of domestic violence. They rely on each other.
It's a powerful contrast. The source notes that while mothers often project their own hopes onto daughters, Hyunam's reality is so limited. Her hopes for Sienna are heartbreakingly basic.
Like just having time to share a meal together safely.
Exactly. So Dong-eun protecting Sienna isn't just like a reward for Hyunam's help. It also symbolizes this deep desire to safeguard the simple safety and joys of youth that Dong-eun herself never had.
Yeah, that really lands. Okay, finally, the visual storytelling. The symbolism and the glory is apparently incredibly rich.
The sources really highlight this. One says the show is exceptionally detail-oriented with almost no meaningless props. Everything seems intentional.
A key example is that book, Hermann Hesse's Demian. It pops up twice. Hyunam misremembers it, then her daughter corrects her. And the sources quote that pivotal line.
The bird must get rid of its shell. Eggs are the world. If you want to be born in the world, you have to destroy the world.
That metaphor is just perfect for this show, isn't it?
Absolutely central. It encapsulates the need for these characters to break free from their oppressive shells, the trauma, the abuse, society's expectations. To be truly born or reborn, they feel they have to destroy the corrupt world that trapped them. Applies to Dong-eun, Hyunam, maybe even Yeojung and Do-young in their own ways.
And there's significant religious symbolism, too. That image of the cross made of light in the gym where young Dong-eun was attacked.
So striking. The sources suggest it could symbolize the futility of looking for salvation in traditional religion when faced with such overwhelming evil and, crucially, lack of intervention. It echoes Dong-eun later saying she lost her faith.
And then, say, Pruga's church scenes. Often controversial, apparently, but noted for symbolism, too, the ruined temple, the blocked cross.
Suggesting a world where maybe God is absent or unreachable. And perhaps where modern things like phones used to record sins or deliver judgment have kind of replaced divine oversight. It's a sharp critique of hypocrisy.
Other visual tricks mentioned include using lines and frames for tension, breaking the 180-degree rule for disorientation, clever match cuts, specific camera work, like that camera roll effect for Hyunam's fear.
And that amazing detail actress Song Hye-kyo apparently has a contract clause saying Alexa cameras must be used for her scenes.
Wow. Talk about commitment to a specific look for your main character.
Right. It shows these visual choices aren't just pretty pictures. They're integral to the storytelling, deepening the emotion, reinforcing the themes.
Okay, so given all this, the depth of the story, the compelling characters, the heavy themes tackled with such visual flair, it's maybe not that surprising that The Glory achieved just massive global resonance.
The numbers are pretty staggering. The sources detail it hitting the top 10 list in 91 countries.
91? That's huge.
It really is. To put it in context, that's right up there with global giants like Squid Game and All of Us Are Dead. They hit 94 countries. And way higher than other really popular K-dramas like Extraordinary Attorney Woo, which was 57.
So that level of reach confirms it really broke through. It wasn't just K-drama fans watching. It reached a massive mainstream audience, putting it in the same league as Netflix's biggest English-language shows like Stranger Things or Bridgerton.
Yeah, there was even talk it could become Netflix's second most successful Korean show ever, maybe hitting over 670, 680 million total viewing hours. These aren't just stats. They represent a show that genuinely captured the global zeitgeist.
And the sources offer a really interesting way to think about why it had such an impact. Cultivation theory.
Right. Cultivation theory basically suggests that the more time you spend watching television, the more likely you are to believe the real world is similar to the TV world. Repeated exposure can gradually shape your perception of reality.
And the glory seems almost tailor-made for this effect. One study cited found that 58%, nearly 60% of viewers binge-watched the show.
That intense, concentrated dose of the story really increases the potential for its themes, its worldview, to kind of cultivate in viewers' minds.
Viewers quoted in the sources talked about being totally hooked, almost addicted, saying they can't wait, can't stop watching, especially when fueled by that anger towards the bullies.
That level of immersion makes a viewing experience incredibly potent.
Combine that with the production quality, the brutal, uncensored violence shown in sharp 4K HDR, immersive sound. It's a visceral experience, hard to just shake off.
Definitely enhances engagement, and therefore the potential cultivation effects, which leads to this phenomenon sometimes called mean world syndrome.
The mean world syndrome.
Yeah. Cultivation theory suggests that if you constantly watch a world depicted as dangerous, cruel, untrustworthy, you might start to develop a more cynical, fearful view of actual reality.
And some viewers of The Glory basically said that, didn't they? Comments like, people live good life and they do not have mercy for others. The story is true. They saw the show as reflecting a harsh reality.
Exactly. They felt it validated a cynical worldview.
Which is where a really significant concern comes up. Could the show, even while condemning bullying, inadvertently normalize violence or inspire imitation?
That's the worry. Sources mention viewers saying they felt badass, or that they supported physically fighting back against bullies. Even phrases like, sometimes it's just best to fight fire with fire.
Cultivation theory does suggest that seeing violence depicted repeatedly, especially as a successful or cathartic response to conflict, can reinforce the idea that it's natural or okay. Maybe even desensitize people to real-world aggression.
And there's also the availability heuristic possibly at play. That mental shortcut where we judge how likely something is based on how easily we remember examples of it.
So if you can easily recall Dong-eun's brutal bullying and her satisfying, successful revenge,
you might unconsciously start to think real life is more like that than it actually is, potentially influencing how you think about resolving conflicts, even though Dong-eun's methods are, let's face it, highly unrealistic for the real world.
yeah, definitely not a practical guide.
However, this is important, we have to balance these concerns with the positive experiences viewers also reported. Many related deeply, felt excited and relieved by the revenge.
It offered a kind of virtual catharsis.
Exactly, a fictional triumph over bullying and injustice that clearly resonated on a very personal level for a lot of people, maybe helping them process their own stuff.
Of course, no show this big escapes criticism entirely. Some viewers apparently found the sheer level of bullying depicted just implausible. Over the top.
Yeah, pointing to things like the gym being used as this private torture chamber as maybe stretching belief a bit too far.
There were reactions to specific scenes, too. That final I love you between Dong-eun and Yo-jung apparently left some people confused, felt that didn't quite track with the romance level shown before.
I saw that mentioned. And the controversial topless scene got a lot of debate.
Right. Some sources noted negative reactions, especially in Korea. People finding it unnecessary, maybe just there for buzz. One source even said the actress reportedly wished she'd worn something else.
Interesting. Critiques also touched on pacing. Some felt Part 2 wasn't quite as tight as Part 1, or that splitting the season felt a bit artificial.
And minor editing things, like maybe confusing time jumps or transitions between the younger and older Dong-eun sometimes.
These are all valid discussion points for sure. But they seem to exist alongside, rather than really diminishing the show's just overwhelming success and the powerful impact it clearly had worldwide.
Exactly. The debates happened precisely because the show hit so hard and resonated so deeply with so many people.
Couldn't agree more.
And that brings us towards the end of this deep dive into The Glory. We've journeyed through Moon Dong-eun's horrific trauma, followed the intricate, decades-long path of her revenge.
We've explored that complex web of characters, the truly vile perpetrators, the nuanced allies, those caught in the middle, all driving this intense narrative.
We've unpacked the heavy themes that lift it beyond just a thriller. The reality of school violence, the nature of justice, the role of class and power, trauma's long shadow, resilience, those complex mother-daughter dynamics.
And all underscored by that potent visual symbolism we talked about.
And we've looked at its undeniable global impact, how it became this cultural moment, sparking conversations everywhere about bullying, justice, and the power, maybe even the potential pitfalls of media influence, viewed through lenses like cultivation theory.
The Glory definitely succeeded in tackling incredibly tough subjects with real intensity and emotional weight. Even if it sparked debate about realism or its potential effects, it was designed to provoke thought, and it absolutely did that.
So considering everything we've discussed today, the powerful reactions, the analyses, does The Glory ultimately land as this necessary cathartic story of justice for the wronged? Or does its depiction of successful, brutal revenge maybe risk blurring the lines between fictional satisfaction and real-world consequences in ways that, warrant some deeper thought?
That's definitely something to chew on long after the credits roll. And maybe something to keep in mind next time you get pulled into a really compelling dark story like this one.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing all the sources that made this deep dive possible today. We really hope this has given all of you listening a richer, maybe more nuanced understanding of The Glory and just why it became such a significant global event.